So, mate, welcome. Danny,
Thanks for having me.
yeah, is a founder and runs a very successful commercial brokerage called Moneybee that may or may not have something to do with your surname, and I'll let you explain that. But yeah, tell us a little bit about your background, Danny, and what you're doing now.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, there's a little play on the bee theme there that resonates through the family, but not much more deep than that. um, it rolls off the tongue pretty well. That's all that matters, right? Um, my background, mate, I've been in finance in some description for the last sort of 25 years, mostly working in and around SMEs on the lending side. Worked for banks, ran a business myself, which sold into a listed company that many of us would know. Worked for them for a few years as their head of sales, building their business. It's been quite successful for them, but my sort of path took me towards brokering. I hadn't been on that side of the fence before. Some call it the dark side. I'm not sure yet what my opinion is,
Depends
but
which side you're on, I guess.
yeah, I guess, but we're finding it quite exciting, and especially with some of the topics that we might sort of go over and discuss. It can be sort of a pretty complex landscape at the moment, but that's really interesting and cool to work with businesses and help them sort of get through to the other side of some of these situations that they've got themselves in. But yeah, we're a finance brokering business focusing on business finance. Background predominantly in asset, but a lot of debtor capital raising against it, business cash flow loans, trade finance, everything that a business needs to sort of grow and survive.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, well, look, as I said, welcome. We obviously, look at the world through that sort of lens of ATO debt, and certainly from our perspective, this is probably the toughest that I've been doing this for 11 years, and it's the toughest that we've seen the ATO in terms of collection activity, in terms of payment arrangement terms, in terms of remitting interest and penalties and so forth, and getting holds on recovery action and everything. And we do what we do in terms of stopping the recovery action if we can get them into long-term payment plans that can clear the debt through cash flow, and where we can look to see if we can reduce interest and penalties to bring the terms and everything down. But we're seeing more and more, and it's no more complicated, I think, than if you look at the pure numbers. Prior to COVID, the undisputed ATO debt was around that $26 billion mark. Officially, it's over 50, and we believe it's over 60 and could be as high as $70 billion. And that means the ATO are under a lot of pressure to get that or get that down. But it also means that a lot of businesses simply can't clear that debt through cash flow, which is where people like yourself come in, people who are very experienced in the market and also are very comfortable and working with lenders that are comfortable with businesses with ATO debt. So it is a difficult and interesting time, and I'll be interested to see what you're seeing, and I guess how you're seeing the ATO impact some of the deals that you're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's driven by demand, and that's what you're essentially saying, right? The tax debt has never been as high as it is, and so the demand that we're finding is people are looking for solutions, and I'm sure you're finding the same sort of thing. We've sort of got one that we're working on at the moment together, you and I, and there's sort of 1.4 million in tax debt there. It's a good thriving business. There's some difficulties behind it. We need to work with an array of lenders, not just one, to provide a solution. We've got about 1.1 secured to help pay that out. You'll sort of come into the picture there and help negotiate some of the GIC away, which is another interesting topic, not being deductible now, but we've got this customer sort of in a position where they didn't know what to do, to be honest. They've got a debt there that they weren't going to be able to service. I'm not sure the ATO is going to keep turning up with payment plans for them. And even still, when they do, they can be sort of, I don't, you tell me, but maybe 2 years, 3 years maximum payment plan. And we're putting these facilities over 5 year facilities with even balloons at the end, or evolving facilities on invoice factoring products. The solution for this customer is that they have a set of loans set up to pay the ATO out, get that monkey off their back, and give them a bit of blue sky to think about growing as well. Because if they're sitting there with tax debt, you know, lenders are sort of struggling. There are some commercial lenders out there, but some of them are struggling to sort of will struggle to get their head around them buying new assets when they've got that much tax debt sitting behind them. So that's always an interesting sort of component as well.
Yes, yeah. Look, and it's a really good example, Danny, because that client that we're working on together have really sort of, I guess, exhausted the ATO's patience, and I think they were very close to the ATO taking some action, and it's great because and this is what I'm often saying to people is that I do a lot of sort of speaking engagements with broker groups and funder groups, and I say in the room is the solution. And it's partially us, but it's also partially you guys. And, that's a situation whereby but for that business would be in a lot of strife. But we're able to get the ATO on side, put together an exit strategy for the commissioner for the ATO with the work that you're doing, and a really good example because sometimes it's not a neat sort of tied up in a bow tie. This one has been
Yeah.
quite a difficult and complex matter. The ATO are working with us, and we're going to have a situation where most of the debt can be paid out through the funding. There will be some debt left over, which we can put into, we've got it on hold with the ATO in a short-term arrangement. Currently, we then put it into a longer-term arrangement for the balance, and then some of that balance will then be cleared as part of the removal of the interest and penalties, leaving a much smaller balance that they can literally clean up over time, but on their ear and get on with business. So it's a really one of those good news stories. The commissioner gets out the other side. They'll be paid in full. They don't have to have this situation where they've got to look at another business and do they wind up. They're presented with a solution, and that's what I was saying before about for us. It's really important working with people like yourselves so that we can get those solutions because the the reality was that debt was beyond them to pay out of cash flow. So it was never going to be a solution, a long-term payment plan. They have done that in the past and they haven't been able to support it. And, kudos to you for bringing us in because otherwise, they may be in a very different situation. And it's one of those good news stories.
Well, we've talked about it as well. As it's not there's not one solution to all matters, and sometimes it requires several different solutions. So you and I work closely together often because we complement what we're doing, but there are other options out there. We talk about SBRs as a small business restructure. That's an opportunity for customers that fit the parameter to renegotiate with their creditors, and most often that is the ATO. And so they're able to negotiate a cents in the dollar figure with the ATO, which is not always, as we said, the best option.
Mm.
Most people don't want to go down the complete wind-up phase. They've got a good business that's pretty successful. Sometimes it's COVID. Sometimes it's a single event that stopped them from being able to keep up with their commitments. And I think we as brokers need to offer the client all of the solutions and let them know what's available and what's on the table. Often we're speaking to clients that have no idea that we could do this for them. They really don't know, maybe their financials aren't up to date. They're not property owners. They don't have that sort of security available. And our job is really to source all of the options for security. And we've never been in a better landscape in terms of lenders as well. The market's pretty saturated, and that can work for clients' favours because we've got a lot of options in terms of lenders, and they're getting much more commercial around this tax debt space as well. Is you sort of can't have the perfect client all the time, and in a competitive space they need to sort of adapt, and one of those things is getting their head around this tax debt and how to operate around that stuff. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We had one of the sort of senior lenders from one of the big four banks in our boardroom. This was sort of I was going to say during COVID, but it wasn't during one of the lockdown periods, obviously. And so we weren't being naughty. But I remember as we were sort of coming out of it, asking that question about, are particularly the major banks likely to relax their lending strategy for businesses with ATO debt? Because we know, as I said, if it's gone from 26 to north of 60 billion, yes, we know that the average debt that we are managing has roughly doubled, but we also know there's a lot more businesses out there. And would those major banks look at because it was always a complete no. And the answer was no, we're not changing our lending policies. They say they have changed them now, and we sort of work with a couple of them. But there is no doubt that if you are a business out there and you have ATO debt, that you really are on the nose with a lot of the lenders. But as you say, there's a lot of lenders have come into the market or have changed their lending policies, and there's plenty of options out there now for businesses. And it seems to me that, if there's only one message today, and that is that don't put your head in the sand, because we know, as I said, the ATO are becoming much tougher. But on top of that, they are moving far, far quicker than I've ever seen it. And we're not talking, we used to say to people, you've got sort of 12, 18, even 24 months before it gets really serious. We're now talking weeks, and, it can be from sort of zero to you've got a statutory run and wind up. That can all happen through all the recovery stuff within 6 to 8 weeks. And, there is a definite push from the ATO to clear up these businesses with the ATO debt and get that number down. And they can get it down either by collecting it, which will take, as you mentioned, 24, 36 months, or they can wind them up and bring the debt down much quicker. Clearly, the Commissioner would like to get the money in, but the reality is, as I said, if there's only one message, it's get in contact. There are solutions. There's always solutions for this. You and I we've just sort of, we know that those solutions there. We're working through one now, which we've almost finished, and there's a great outcome there. And that's available to most people and most businesses. But the worst thing you can do is, head in the sand and just ignore or hope it's all going to go away, because that's the one thing it's not going to happen.
That's right, and as you know, and we sort of touched on it before, the passing of the new law around GIC, it's not going to be deductible anymore. This is one of the levers that they've pulled. We're seeing
Yeah.
people have ATO defaults put against their credit file. That wakes you up pretty quickly when you're applying for a truck loan, and the lender comes back and says you've got a $500,000 default on there from the ATO. And look, they still, to my knowledge, they're still working with us once they're engaged with a broker like ourselves, or they've got solutions, or they're ringing and speaking to the ATO. The ATO, once you've agreed on a solution, they will remove that. But you don't want to get it to that point. It's better to be, as you say, proactive on the front foot. Talking to groups like us and yourself, have a conversation. That's free. We can give you some options. The option of the SBR is still available, and there's still ways to. We actually work with clients where we sort of manage some debt to get into the SBR, so that the plan's accepted, and sees them out the other side quite quickly. That's not always the solution. Sometimes it is, but you should be having a honest and frank discussion with people like ourselves to make sure
Yeah,
you're
with
managing
with a
it well.
range of people, as you say, because there's no sort of one size fits all in this.
No.
I know even with us, we about 3% of the clients we see literally cannot pay the debt back and cannot get finance, so they have to go down one of those insolvency routes, and the SBR route's one of them that has had a lot of press and a lot of activity. And I think in one sense it's probably done its job. The attitude has very much changed within the ATO, and if there's any intercompany loans, any directors' loans, and whatever's been put up is less than that. They're knocking a lot of them back now. The interesting thing we're finding around that is, and as I said, for 3% of the people, I think it's. I wouldn't say it's a great idea, but it's kind of they've got to go down that sort of route. But I think it's probably been overused, and I think the commissioner knows that. The tricky thing for businesses doing that is there's a lot of I guess things they don't understand, and probably unintended consequences around government contracts, around licenses. If you're a builder, a whole bunch of things. It triggers insurance issues. It can trigger issues with your banks in terms of all the default provisions and so forth. But one of the big things is that we're seeing and we're seeing quite a bit of this, because we get a lot of referral work from people like yourself who say, "Oh, look, there is a default. It's an ATO default. Can you fix it?" And we go, "Yeah, of course we can." It's what we do every day of the week. When we go and look at it, it's not it is a reporting by the ATO, but it's not on the credit reporting. It's with ASIC, because they've gone through an SBR. And the tricky thing around that is that that's there for long term, whereas the credit reporting ones we can get removed, and they're removed permanently. So people have to think seriously about doing that, because it does have those consequences. People think it's a private thing. It's not. It's reported with ASIC like any other. And on top of that, what we're finding is we're getting a lot of them now with the ATOs refusing them, and then we have to try and go and negotiate a payment plan when they've signed a declaration saying they're insolvent to get the SBR in.
Yep.
And that's a tricky one. But so far, we're 3 from 3. We've done 3 in the last fortnight, and we're getting them through. But there is an extra layer of analysis going, well, hang on, you just told us you're insolvent, and now you want a payment plan and continue to trade. And the commissioner has a real issue there because they're supposed to protect other businesses from insolvent businesses. So interesting times, but it's all new and we'll get through it all. But it's yeah, interesting times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the footprint that it's potentially going to leave there when you go through an SBR, and like it is a light version of an insolvency sort of event, but we don't know how lenders are going to act towards this going forward as well. Low doc world, low doc lending, there's a minimal amount of searches, there's a minimal amount of information. So behind the scenes, and my experience of sitting on that side is, credit departments will go and look for anything that they can find, in the public domain, and with the searches and logins and authorities that they've got, because we're getting a lot less information from them on a low doc space. So at some point, I think, lenders are going to start saying, well, hang on, we need to know if this one's been through an SBR. It looks a little bit like it might have been. They'll find the signs, the red flags, and potentially, I don't know, but potentially they start saying, if you've been through an SBR, we're not lending to.
Mm.
We
Or you
don't
got to
want to
pay
see
another
that.
2% or 3% or
You
5%.
got to pay a higher rate, absolutely. There's always solutions, but yeah, you might pay for it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, that's good. And Danny, obviously, as I said, we look at things through the lens of the ATO, but how are you seeing the market at the moment?
it's tight. Like, I think the market's definitely pulled back a little bit. I mentioned a sort of saturation of lenders. I think there's a saturation of everything. There's plenty of businesses out there and maybe not quite enough work to go around just at the moment. I don't think anything's too dire, but lenders are willing to lend. We all sort of want to do business. We want to keep the economy turning. So yeah, I'm finding it competitive, but robust, and there's plenty of good businesses out there sort of doing good things.
Danny, mate, thank you so much for today. It's been really, really great having you on.
Yeah, absolutely. You too, Michael, and thanks for having us on. Look forward to working in the future.
Done. Cheers, mate.